It's a fifth seminar series, part of the seminar series that we are having. And we are glad to have Eugen here to do this seminar today for us. Eugen was born in Tanzania, but she grew up in Nairobi, Kenya, before she ended up in Australia. She's an author. She's written quite a number of science fiction books, and she's been nominated for a number of awards. She's also an adjunct fellow at University of Tasmania, and we've just been touching base on what she's been doing this evening there, teaching. She's also a teacher, as I am here at Imperial. So we welcome Eugen to do her seminar on the topic of art and science, the marriage of Figaro. I will hand over now to you, Eugen, to take it from here.
Thank you so much, Onesimus. And I'm just going to request for housekeeping if anybody who's not speaking, just to have your microphone on mute. So this presentation is part of the seminar series on applied African speculative fiction, how we can use storytelling in research, policy, and activism. African writers are increasingly imagining the impacts of technology in transforming environments and people on the continent and beyond. And so I'm talking to you from Melbourne in Australia. I am Eugen Bacon. And to begin, I would like to acknowledge the First Nations, the first storytellers and traditional owners of the land we live in, the true owners of the seas and the waterways of our country. I am African Australian. The one is not exclusive from the other. I am okay with my dualities, my hybridity. I am betwixt, a sum of parts. I am a daughter of the Wajita people of Tanzania, and now Australia is my new home country. I acknowledge this land from which I speak to you. It belongs to the Wurundjeri and Bunwurrung people of the Kulin Nations. So I'm going to try to share my screen because, technology can be a little bit of a beast. So I hope it works and behaves today. And I'll just check. Onesimus, just give me a bit of audio. Can you see my screen?
Yes, Eugen, thank you very much.
Very good, thank you. So what about today? Today, I will share with you a little bit about me. I'll talk about the coexistence of art and science, and I'll talk to you about polymaths, a little bit more coming soon. I'll talk to you about collaborating with others, how I use the self as data, and I'll talk to you about the importance of research. Then hopefully we'll have time for Q&As. So what's with the title, The Marriage of Figaro? So The Marriage of Figaro is a 4-act comedic opera that Mozart composed in 1786 in collaboration with an Italian libretto, Lorenzo da Ponte. So this is not a veneration of white people, just bear with me, I'm going somewhere with this. The Marriage of Figaro is a story of mistaken identities, a whirlwind that happens on the craziest day, and it involves a count, a countess, a maid, Susanna, and a peasant, Figaro. And in all the craziness that happens, Figaro and Susanna find room to grow their love for each other, and the audience claps, 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 encore. So like the Marriage of Figaro, the union of art and science is a rewarding coexistence that offers a rich contribution to knowledge. As with the nature of human genetics, where there is no clear black or white, there are anomalies and rare genetic pools. The marriage of art and science can find staggering sync. It's a marriage with promise of evolving into a never-ending love story. But first, let me talk to you about me. I say that I'm African Australian. I was born in Tanzania and grew up in Kenya. So Nairobi is like my home country. And then I was born in Moshi. And when I was 2 years old, my family moved to Kenya during the days of the East African community. Like seriously, you didn't even need a passport to travel between Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. So my father walked around the countries, and that's how we got to live in Kenya. And I went to school at Precious Blood Secondary School in Riruta. Then I went to Moi Nairobi Girls, then Strathmore College, which is now a university. And it became my pathway to the University of Greenwich in the UK, where I earned a Master of Science in Distributed Computer Systems. I worked at New Scotland Yard, the fingerprint division. I feel so happy when I say this, and everybody says, ooh. So I was just in the IT department. And I before that was before I migrated to Australia through marriage. But then I decided to bring him back to his mother. Take him, I don't want him. And so now there's just me and my son. I am a mother, a woman, a writer, an editor, a scholar, a colleague, a mentor, a friend. I am passionate about so many things. I'm passionate about motherhood, about climate action, about social justice, about stories of culture, tradition, our past, our future, Black people stories. The creative space where I tell stories is literary speculative fiction. I write and perform short stories and prose poetry. I write novels, novellas, creative nonfiction. I write across genres. So these are some of my books. A Place Between Waking and Forgetting is my newest collection of short stories by Row Dog Screaming Press. Afro-centered futurisms in our speculative fiction is an edited anthology of created original essays infused with futuristic story excerpts by award-winning Afro-descendant peoples reflecting on their storytelling and scrutinizing approaches to futurisms. This one came out in November 2024 by Bloomsbury Academic. The titular story in my short story collection, Danged Black Thing, has a sentient laptop named Embu that seeks to replace a woman in her own house by taking her husband. So I do have fun in my writing. Applied science is everywhere. Let's talk about applied science in sport. Athletes are continuously leveraging physics and data sciences to improve their performance by understanding how forces interact between them and the water, the air, the track. They use this knowledge to fine-tune their technique and achieve faster speeds and other results. The 2024 Paris Olympics showcased this in a few athletes. Take Kate Douglas. She won the 200 meters breaststroke in swimming. She trained using accelerometers to measure body movements. Take Leon Marchand. Remember how the crowd ate him up? Allez, Leon! Allez, Leon! He won 4 gold medals. And before that, he had previously participated in a government-funded research program to learn his hydrodynamic profile. So athletes study how the human body works during activity, and this helps them to improve performance by adjusting nutrition and training regimes. They optimize biomechanics, psychology, anatomy, and physiology to perform better and with efficiency. Tennis tournaments, and this might surprise you, use mathematical probability to rank players, to predict the ball's velocity, to look at the air drag and the trajectory. They actually even use probability in scheduling because it helps them to manage the number of matches in a single day based on looking at the percentages of first serves or forced errors by a player, for example. So what is applied science in fiction and what is applied science fiction? So Jo Lindsay Walton, an arts and humanities researcher, and a creative practitioner who adores collaboration involving science and technology, defines applied science fiction as science fiction that is trying to do something to not only glimpse, but also shape the future. Speculative fiction writers know that nothing is black or white. They are all shades of gray and the colorless. Hybrid creatures, parallel universes. Most had science fiction writers like Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov, and Larry Niven are authors who created art that leveraged from science. They were published in the Galaxy Science Fiction pulp magazine around the 50s to the 80s. Without looking for applied sciences in fiction, even in the real world, too far, it's right here. This year in January, you may have seen in the news, the UK government decided to use the imaginations of science fiction writers to help policymakers prepare for potential crises in Britain. The experts asked science fiction writers to sketch the dystopian vision of the future to prepare Britain for threats ranging from pandemics to cyber threats and nuclear attacks. And the writers joined researchers and policymakers in crisis management and resilience, together with a network of academics with funders, including the Ministry of Defense. One of my friends, actually, is an author and a publisher, Gareth Powell, was one of the science fiction writers participating. So this is a true application of storytelling using science and technology as a caution and a hope, and applying that to reality. I don't know whether you've heard of Project Abiona, but this February I was invited to join a project in which poets in the US, in the UK, and beyond collaborated with scientists from an organization called Humanity in Deep Space and professionals in the space industry. The aim was to develop a plausible timeline on a future we're yet to live. It offers a guide on the possible future of NASA activities in the next few decades. So the project is about imaginative but plausible fantasy science fiction in prose and poetry. And here's an example of a poem from a creator playing with text in the form of an imaginative transmission. This form of writing as play is a way to creatively imagine the future of the universe as we know it and to creatively interact with it, if not actually prepare for it. So this is a fictitious transmission that I wrote as part of my contribution to the project, and I'm still having so much fun with it. It's stretching my creative muscles in ways that, are so exciting. So this is just an excerpt. A year has passed since the space probe hurtled into an impact crater on the red planet. Didn't help an iota that the arrival was at the winter pole. In early morning, my first emotion was relief. I recovered to knowing I wasn't dying on an asteroid like my lover Kizito Mawe had predicted. Hell hath no fury. I thought this, curled in a tent in sub-zero, yearned for the heat of a human, even the company of snails, but was dead certain I wouldn't have snogged turbulent Trump if he was the last person standing. Since the invasion of the world and the United States of Charade shut on history, who could blame me for going Martian? Here I am. It's nothing subtropical. Here's another example of a poem that I wrote, and it's a social justice poem that leverages from science, and it's called Hot Enough to Collapse. She is a camshaft, opening and closing in precise sequence to loosen his hand from a fist that's never too late. She's a valve, sweeping the flow of his stomach gases, drunken liquids best forgotten on a desert runway. She's a crankshaft, metamorphosing, linear to rotational, high fatigue strength, where resistance for maybe later as she waits breathlessly. For what? She's a spark plug, dumping the gap to ignite the chamber in which he sleeps as she prepares for the near impossible. She's a gasket, dressed in dust and flames, preventing leakage with joined objects under compression, as if she needs to be told what to shovel in place. She's a cylinder, moving up and down a quiver, combusting fuel that generates power to level out the strangeness of being with him as he fades her light. She's a piston, tight, converting energy to mechanical work so he can grunt and whine her to inexistence. She's a fuel injector, atomizing fuel into an internal engine at a precise point in the combustion cycle, breathless before bracing for his refills. She's an exhaust, veering his noise and fumes from innocent bystanders as they glance at one another, wondering what comes next, even as it's too late for smart choices. What she needs is an escape orbit, a place to move away from the source before he makes her a capture orbit. What she needs is an eclipse, the moon passing between earth and sun, casting shadows so she can remember. What she needs is an axis to stabilize attitude and fortify the right words most suited to arguing. What she needs is a mirror to collect light from distant objects in those uncertain evenings, so that one day she can be hot enough to collapse and explode into a supernova, a big red giant gobbling him into a dwarf star. Here's another poem. It's not science fiction, but I worked with a scientist on the illustrations. So Steve Simpson uses a unique system for generating art from mental states via EEG, measuring brainwaves. And Steve is published over 200 science research papers, most recently in clinical neurology, and was awarded an innovative prize. Excuse me, can somebody just put your mic on mute? and was awarded an innovative prize for technology to make vehicles safer. So I won't read it for time, but I just really want to show you the images, the illustrations that Steve has done for me. So this is another illustration that Steve has done using those electrical brainwave illustrations on my text. And also, I won't read it, but I'll share it with you in the slides. And just look at that. This is an illustration that he did for my prose poem called A Hanging Rope. Just see how Steve's art infuses us a real science fiction aura in the graphics. And this is how you can work with scientists for art. And here's another illustration. It's for a poem titled As the Night Sky Burns, and it's almost robotic, a futuristic world. So let's talk about polymath. What's a polymath? Polymath is a Greek term for a person with expertise and that spans a significant number of different subject areas. Did you know that Italian mathematician, physicist, and astronomer Galileo Galilei was also a painter and his father a musicologist? Did you know that Leonardo da Vinci, renowned for the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper, among other eminent paintings, was a polymath? For all his artistic prowess, Da Vinci was endowed with architectural and engineering talent. Meet scientifically and mathematically trained musical composers such as Alexandru Borodin. Another musical composer, George Antheil, worked with an Austrian-American actress, Hedy Lamarr, on an early technique to spread spectrum communications and frequency hopping necessary to wireless communication from the pre-computer age to the present day. And did you know that English-born Beatrix Potter, famed for her imaginative writings and illustrations in The Tale of Peter Rabbit, was also a natural scientist and conservationist? Now, we don't have to look at white people only for polymaths. We do have African, Afrocentric polymaths. Meet Linda D. Addison, who is a 5-time Bram Stoker Award winner. And someone once described the Bram Stokers as the Oscars in horror fiction. Now, Linda was a computer programmer, and one of her recent poems, like she still infuses the science in her poetry. So one of her poems, Escape Velocity, in her collection called Everything Endless, and it's a collaboration, is an illustration of her scientific slanted poetry with impact. And this is just an excerpt. What speed is needed to escape creeping limitations born from aging collections of molecules, atoms, still vibrating protons and neutrons, dancing even as fragile bones creak, weakened muscles strain against gravity. Meet Adelehin Ijasan. He is an optometrist. He is another polymath. So Adelehin is one of the founding members of the Southverse that I'm part of, an Afrocentric universe. And in one of Adelehin's short story named Zova, published in Mother Sound, the Sauti anthology, he writes, I named you Nitiri. All the other automatons addressed their children by their batch codes. You were not XAA116 to me. You were Nitiri from the old myth. And this is a story that explores an AI's capacity for love, for revolution, and perhaps something more. Some of you have already met Wole Talabi. He's another polymath. You probably already know that Wole is an engineer, and he's another founding member of the Afrocentric Sautiverse. His latest Sauti novella, titled Descent, will be published this year, and it embraces the sense of wonder and scientific exploration, the nature of the sonic storms on one of our invented planets, Orinorin. And his story follows a team of explorers sponsored by cartels down to the planet's surface, where they try to capture energy from an incredibly powerful sonic storm using new technology that has just been developed and is yet to be tested. So you can see how science infuses with art in our fictions. And how am I the self as data? So I was once a scientist and now I am an artist. In a mode of autoethnography, I learn from the self as data. Science has taught me structure, persistence in research, organized skepticism, curiosity, attention to detail, adaptive persistence, and a solutions focus. Art has taught me passion and aesthetics and vision and creativity, inherent meaning, diversity, uniqueness, and the non-linear. So the scientist learns from the artist, who is a mother, a woman, a writer, an editor, a scholar, a colleague, a mentor, a friend. So when my artist consummates with a scientist, I find playful themes, as in this story, industrial pleasure, published in my short story collection, Chasing Whispers by Road Dog Screaming Press. This fun story has a theme of futures energy, where Mayasa is an African migrant who is sick of scrubbing pots and cleaning out toilets for cheap labor. So she follows the promise of an ad from a company named Tantra Lustic that says, hunkering for money, that's all in the past. Mayasa looks and looks at the ad because, being suspicious is a normal part of being a migrant. You don't land a safe foot in the unknown without hosting suspicion. So she goes to this place and it looks all deserted. It's a vacant lot littered with shipping containers. She tolerates the pre-screening with questions of her own. So when the person who's there asks her, why are you here? I need money, Mayasa says. I get you. You'll have it. But first, some questions. Any health conditions? Joylessness. Allergies? Fuckwits. Do you like sex? A lot. But I ditched a few bozos, so I'm not getting any. Do you get orgasms? You want to give me some? Something like that. So Mayasa gets to sit on a drum and says, what do you want me to do? Use your deepest desire to catch the wave, the woman says, and dims the lights. At first, the illumination is lurid. Then Mayasa sees the radiant gold of a provocative African sun against the backdrop of a regal thorn tree. She feels the gentle wind of the savannah rustling grasslands in the wake of a cheetah's chase. She hums with the moon in its sacred beauty that summons a tidal wave. The sun, the wind, the moon, each in turn caresses the longing on Mayasa's tremulous lips, her packed up breast, her opening thighs. She wraps her legs around the drum. Oh, right there. Yes. Check your bank account, the woman says when Mayasa wakes. We've transferred the money. Who cares about the money? Can I do the wave again? Oh, you won't be having Augustine's for a while. What? It's here. In the fine print? It's not forever. Don't panic. Just a small side effect. So Mayasa discovers it's actually a revolution, and it's a revolutionary source of renewable energy using a woman's climax at the source. Mayasa gets to understand that a lot can come from bodily fluids, including soap and body lotions and more. In another story, When the Water Stops, it's a tale of climate change where I imagine what if? What if water is so scarce that people must extract it from blood? But whose? The answer is not good. As the climate turned, it hurled at them bushfires that razed huts to the ground, dust storms that swept away families, drought, all the cattle and sheep gone, reduced to skin, then skeletons. At first, the villagers took turns on the blade, sharing dreams and fears, understanding that as a people they were all the same. But with all the minuses, how much of the water in a bleed could go around a village? They sifted the question on their minds as volunteers sucked on cactus leaves and sap, figs and desert ants 4 to 8 weeks, having bled for the clan. But they still were not strong enough to take another turn when it arrived. The loss was not replenished. So where they first volunteered, now they drew sticks. It was plain luck or miss luck. A stick was a stick. A short one was short. If you drew it, your fate was sealed. Your only solace that this death was not a lonely one, but a communion of equations whose mathematics met societal needs. But even the sticks that were drawn eventually stopped. It was a sacrifice too big. So now it was a matter for those with money or bigger sticks to determine the massacre. And what really happened took place in the vat. The woman in the vat. What she's doing this week is sitting in a bowl right there in the heat shima. She's awash with memories of drowsing, unfolding everything in slow motion. When she looks back on time, what will she remember? She watches the smoke swirling like a benevolent hug, giant clouds bubbling out the words. Where are you now? Her soul is an object, brightest in the sky, hot enough to melt lead. Today, she's a bleed. Tomorrow is a wish. This is the story of the leader of the nation. 10 years ago, the big fat leader came out of his shelter, determined to occupy the steps of a shrine opened as a museum to the Pope. He stunned human rights leaders, a few high courts, and many mothers when he pushed out his lip and held a Bible for 1 full minute as the camera snapped. Riot police fell with batons, rubber bullets, and gas masks on peaceful protesters brandishing slogans with instructions on the art of love. What was a drop of blood when the economy outweighed civil unrest and stocks soared higher? Did you see the Dow? A gain of 267 points. And the advances in the Nasdaq Composite. Evolutionary theory was about the mechanism of natural selection, the form that would leave the most copies of itself. Light years on, every version of the Archbishop in an alternate universe, outraged by the misuse of a facility of worship, would consider the historic violation of principles of humanity and utter 3 spaced words. I can't. This same leader still denied the impacts of change, this time carved in the skull of a drier climate, extinct rainfall and simmering air, migrated lakes and ecosystems all too warm to dwell. The lives of his people were reduced to dependency on the bleeds as a substitute for water. Why can't they eat cake? He asked his Secretary of Defense. Protests were ugly, and a new election was coming up. The rich woman in the metropolis. When the water stops, the blood must flow, says the woman with a rainbow diamond shaped into a bangle around her wrist. The $1 billion peacock brooch on her hand was a gift from a cousin of a great uncle whose name she tried to remember but couldn't. It was just too hard. She flourishes from the catastrophe of others, blooms on the unimportant, like the people in her cellar, disposables from the village. Theirs is a narrative she doesn't believe in, the kind of story refracted in old photos of art historians who assess brushstrokes in online meetings to cast doubt on the whole matter of the Renaissance. The fabric of the politics that gave rise to Hitler, Mussolini, and Amin Dada is not important, is it? She can't help it if those people don't belong in a near-perfect picture of what they are about. They are flaws, feelings of awkwardness that cast a different image that's fleeting each time she looks. There are many books on the subject of humanity, but this is hard. Turn off the sound of their groaning, she snaps to her servants. The moaning is a sound that's never black or white. It doesn't obey the rules of composition. If their cry is a question, it's a cry in a language of Babel. She doesn't understand its vowels, its syllables, its syntax, its parables or context, and it's impossible to try because that's so hard. What's not hard to understand is vintage produce that has a good nose. The ones from the village come at a good price, and their blood is pure. Village blood wears the right acidity and an aroma of smoke. Bacon and pepper, violets inside a copper finish, and blood that's vintage must flow for the survival of her species. She cradles with affection a labradoodle puppy to her breast. But what happens to the little ones? Are you my mother? I'm in search of something I don't know. There's a hand and a gaze, a smile and a scent. It's a comfort, it's a warmth. I don't remember the face that comes and goes, the love that is a crack. It's complicated and unsafe, blurred and full of crumble. Nostalgia, a great uncle with empty socks. You think of this moment over and over, wishing you and the rest of the world remembered different. In another of my stories, Unlimited Data, Natukunda, an illiterate woman in the village, gives all for her husband, her children, because she allows him to put a blue chip into her body. At first, she resisted. She looked at her husband when he suggested it, looked at him as though he was wearing empty tins around his leg. You're mad, foolish, or both, she said. Take me back to my parents, and they will return your dowry. Crooked wood shows the best sculpture, Natukunda. The programmer is working with nature. His invention will change our lives. And who knows about this programming? Everybody. So why aren't they buying it? He who can't dance says the ground is full of rocks. But you and I know better than that, Natukunda. We dance like there is no tomorrow. And you say a chippy? Yes. Inside my body? Yes. Will it hurt? So tiny in your neck, you wouldn't feel a thing. Like when I cut my foot on that hole and the doctor at the clinic did me tetanus with a needle and I didn't get sick. Yes. Easy like a shot. You're doing this for us now too. For you and me and baby Mukasa and your parents. I can work with no worry about data on my phone, and you can send more money to your mother. It's important that you do this. For what? Unlimited data. It's called Bluetooth. Waves from your body will connect with my smartphone and will pair. You'll never need a telephone for yourself. Your whole body will be a smartphone, and I'll never need to buy data bundles again. It all comes with a chip. Bully toothy for how long? It lasts a lifetime, he said. And what happened next to Natukunda remains unfortunate. I continue to use the self as data, where the scientist talks to the artist. In my novel, Secondhand Daylight, a time travel collaboration with Andrew Hook, who is a UK author, we explore the effects of time jumps. Green and Zada are parallel protagonists in a reverse story across timelines. Something is happening to Green. He is an ordinary guy, but he's time jumping forward at a startling rate. 1 minute he's today, the next minute he's 2 weeks ahead. Zada is a scientist in the future. She knows about Green's conundrum and seeks to solve it by going backwards in time. Can she stop him from jumping to infinity? The point of their intersection is fleeting but memorable, each one's travel impacting the other's past or future, and one of them doesn't even know it. In another story, in my migrant story, Serengeti, which is a novel with elements of superstition and African spirituality, ghost stories, and magical realism, Chanzu is a migrant who's lost everything. So they go to this fictitious African village in a place called Serengeti, the name, of course, being my playful derivative of Serengeti, the national park in Tanzania. And there, Chanzu must develop this software that will give meaning to refugees. It's a software that will allow them to recreate their own lived experiences, to design their own adventures, four-dimensional. It allows them to shape their own stories. So I do collaborate with others, and I love collaborating with others. I've written short stories with people. I've written novels with people like the one I did with Andrew Hook. And now I am part of a universe of, it's an Afrocentric Southverse, and so I'm part of a collective of African writers who have created this Afrocentric universe of 5 planets, 2 suns, and a spirit moon. It's a world of science and fantasy where there is no written language, but we play with technology and sound magic to scrutinize the world as we know it and use speculative fiction as a response to our world. Our stories in the Southverse engage with difference, for example, in empowering women. In one of my short stories that I wrote, set in the Southverse, it's called The Mystery of the Vanishing Echoes. It's a multiverse story where Sherlock Holmes is a Black woman, Sherlock Holmesy, and Watson is a child. He's her ward, and his name is Wawatison, in short, Wawati. And so this story empowers the woman as the sleuth and the child as well. In another story called Sina, the child with no echo, and the name of the child comes from the word Sina in Swahili, which means I don't have. And it's set in the planet Ekukwe, where everybody has an echo. And what I do in this story is that I empower a disabled child whose neurodivergence then becomes a gift. So in the Southverse, already we have also met Wole Talabi's novella Descent, the one that I talked about, and Adelehin Ijasan's short story Zova. Both of them are set in this Afrocentric Southverse. And Sauti means sound or voice in Swahili. And the Sauti is about the power of the word as captured in the origin story by Wole Talabe and Stephen Embleton in a story called The Song of Our Mother. Kwara, it is acquired. Yain, it is uttered. Rakwa, it is released. So let's just take a moment to remind ourselves why we care about applied science in fiction. Let's think about Black speculative fiction and speculative fiction as a whole. Science fiction, speculative fiction, can enable responses to global racial, gender, environmental, and other crises by offering a cosmological time frame and perspective. Speculative fiction offers an escape, an imagined place where we can find a psychological getaway from confronting matters of the everyday. Good fiction may be a travel through time, and it takes you back to your childhood, reminding you of an unpolluted state removed from now. Fiction can put us at ease, mind travelers to mystical worlds with characters we are curious about. Could someone please go on mute? In its qualities of non-realistic fiction, speculative fiction offers a safe space with which to explore realistic constructs that may be tougher to tackle or relate to in their fullest constructs or reality. For example, you can use speculative fiction to address racism, sexuality, social injustice, dysfunction in a form of subversive activism that is safe for the reader to explore. And we capture this in stories in our anthology, Mother Sound, a Sauti anthology. So through a different kind of writing, unique world building, our Black speculative fiction equips us with the foundations to cultivate inclusive worlds and characters. And we can explore our place in the universe. We can ask fundamental philosophical questions. We can interrogate the past and we can learn from it. We can contemplate a future with paradigm shifting technologies. So my background in sciences has always honed my curiosity. I am always fascinated by speculative fiction that what if? Good speculative fiction will make you feel what Franz Kafka says to look for in a good story. In his 1904 letter to Oscar Pollock, Kafka wrote, I think we ought to read only the kind of books that wound or stab us. If the book we're reading doesn't wake us up with a blow to the head, what are we reading for? A book must be the axe for the frozen sea within us. Applying science in my fiction offers this safe space to explore. It helps me feel what Kafka says to look for in a good story. And I can use art as this subversive activist to interrogate my curiosity in what if stories. Collaborating with others and their visions can further encourage a response in fiction to global situations. One of the anthologies that I was involved in, called Face Change, in the call for submissions, the anthology asked for stories that defamiliarize and denaturalize modern energy systems, the exploitation and hierarchies they perpetuate, the necessities they presume. It asked for stories that imagine and interrogate energy transitions and futures in their complexity, their price as well as their promise. It asked for stories that go beyond the apocalypse and conjure an eco-modernism with alternative forms of economy and ecology, metabolism and mobility. It asked for stories of face change. In response to this call, I wrote a short story called Naked Earth, and it's climate fiction that's also published in my collection of short stories, A Place Between Waking and Forgetting. So Naked Earth is a character-based story that explores survival and is set in a fictional world where climate action has divided its citizens. It's a world where everyone must declare their political and moral stances in every single aspect of their lives. It doesn't matter whether it's for work, whether it's within the family, whether it's when looking for a dating partner. It determines how they're graded in assessments, how they get their jobs, how they're considered for grants, The world is brutally divided with no respect for family or relationship. So our protagonist, Naima, wrestles with the implications of neutrality in this dystopian world that I've created, and how each choice she makes directly impacts how the rest of the society views her. So let me share with you a tiny excerpt. Naima's sky is falling. Her universe is split into embracing and unshackling, and everywhere is scorching. Privilege is synonymous with who leads or who sponsors. And right now, with the lefties and right-wingers disconcerting the undecided with formation, misinformation, the world is more than random. She once learned to tell embracers from the unshackled by the bracelets they wear or don't wear. Embracers brandish luminescent bracelets shimmering with kilojoules from yoga, sexual intercourse, the simple act of walking home from an embrace-friendly workplace. Each bracelet transmits kilowatts to a recycling tower that helps save the planet. Then shackled, eat as they like and wave bare arms as they jog on treadmills or in parks, dripping sweat on rubber mats, naked earth or non-embraced towels. The undecideds wear blank amulets that sell dear and state nothing, and they incur hefty insurance premiums that are compulsory to renew. But nothing is black or white, because in the midst of all this dichotomy are conservatives, moderates, and progressives. The undecideds make things difficult, for instance, on matters of jury selection, especially in trials where the alleged victim and perpetrator are on either side of belief. The Knox case was one such conundrum. People still brawl about the not guilty verdict, where guilt stood right there in the jury's faces. Turns out it's a frequent occurrence that some undecideds firm their belief towards embracement or unshackled mid-trial, swinging verdicts or leading to mistrials. Naima's indecision is not out of choice, but from necessity. What she knows is that her body is not full of pebbles and scales. She doesn't want to become a stone like her brother Brian, dead to what it really means to be human inside and emating only for a cause. History is full of contradictions, and she might watch it with irony and settlement, even oh. But she doesn't want her children to grow up in the languor of pale dirt country. She wants them to see a world that's a bloody beauty and safe, something she worries that then shackled in their denials of entanglement and responsibility might not understand. Hers is a critical distance that carries doubt and grief for a future that is closing. It's an old language that is no language in a world so starkly divided. I want to tell you about so many collaborations that have enriched my appreciation of science. Life Beyond Us is one such anthology, edited by an evolutionary biologist, Julie Novakova, and it was published by the European Astrobiology Institute and Laxa Media. The anthology explores strange new worlds beyond ours in short stories, and each fiction writer is paired with a scientist who writes an accompanying essay to the short story, and the scientist focuses on separating fiction from fact. And so life beyond us has stories on life on other worlds, unexpected phenomena, black hole planets, how a scientist goes to preserve Mars, an astronaut's journey towards the solar system to find her lost scientist mother, Titan as a place of life, the use of robots in space exploration. So in my story for this anthology called Human Beings, society outcasts find belonging in other worlds, and it explores the concept of an alternate Earth where disadvantaged people in our world as we know it discover better lives. And Tony Milligan was the scientist assigned to work with me. And so he's fascinated with space ethics and the relationship between science and indigenous knowledge. And so he writes that essay companion to my story. I envisioned something similar about alternate worlds in my short story, The Set, published in Multiverses, an anthology of alternate realities, edited by Preston Grassman and published by Titan Books. Applied science in fiction helps us explore the possibilities of tomorrow like never before. Working with experts, creative writers can innovate and disrupt. A good writer provokes you into peering at the potential consequences of scientific progress, technological development, and societal evolution. And as with any scholarly paper, fiction needs you to research diligently. Every research project must start with a sense of wonder. Doing research is about enhancing, it's about quality, it's about adding detail that gives life and credibility to your fiction. Ask yourself who, why, what, how. Ask yourself, what if? Treat your fiction as a case study. What sort of research do you think is necessary for this story? Good research fleshes out what the creative muse has given you, and you can make it something robust. So today I've shared with you a little bit about myself. I've talked about the coexistence of art and science in the Marriage of Figaro. I've shared with you about polymaths, about the self as data, about collaborating with others and the importance of research. Only an insecure artist or scientist would contemplate the other with suspicion rather than curiosity. And perhaps there are no true artists or scientists, but rather inhibited polymaths who could well benefit from exercising both sides of their brain. Art can learn structure, organize skepticism, curiosity, attention to detail, adaptive persistence, and a solutions focus from science. Science can learn passion, aesthetics, vision, creativity, inherent meaning, diversity, uniqueness, and the non-linear from art. But let me stop here. I've gone through a lot today and I'll stop sharing because I have a question. Do you have questions? And you're welcome to turn on your videos and you can
Thanks,
mute yourself.
thanks, Eugen. I think that has been quite fascinating for many today. It's been a journey. You've taken us through a journey, and we've managed to see quite a lot of good that science can learn from art and science fiction, and also the vice versa. So we'll open the session now, as Eugen has said, to questions. We are not so many, so you can unmute and pose your question, or if you find that difficult, you can put it in the chat, and I'll pose it to Eugen. So questions.
You can make a comment, give an observation. If I said something that triggered you, you can have a whinge and say it to me now. Otherwise, forever hold your peace.
I like that. Just to start us off, what I wanted to ask or comment about is the marriage itself between art and science, and the fact that you collaborated with Steve, and you've showed the art that the artwork that he used to portray the work that you are doing.
Yeah.
How do you get to that sort of marriage? I think it came out a little bit from when you were discussing that slide, those two slides. But how do you initiate that? Because part of the what we want to do as a project is to be able to bring this to bring this marriage. So a scientist who's not exposed to this world can work with an artist, to a speculative writer, to do something together. Where do you start?
I think it's just having that curiosity. I have my eye out everywhere. So I'd never even met Steve Simpson in person, but one of the publishers had published his collection of poetry, and I noticed his art. And I thought, this is really fascinating. And I say to him, like, it would be really great to collaborate. And a collaboration is about respect. It's about trust. So you both trust that you're bringing in something. And usually I'm very hands-off. What I'll do, I'll say, I'm great with text. I can do anything with text, and you're great with your art. So I will give you the text and you do the art, and just look at the text and whatever inspires you. Because I like not to be prescriptive. And so just allowing that freedom, basically let the text move you and just do anything that comes out. And in most cases, it just really works well because I've allowed the scientists to feel whatever it is and just to draw what they can from what they know best. So everybody has their strengths and weaknesses, and just to respect that. Yeah. And most of the collaborations, sometimes when I'm invited to write for an anthology, and like in the Life Beyond Us, I don't know that much about astrophysics or things about galaxies and planets, but it's about research. It's approaching everything with that sense of wonder and knowing that not everything that I'm going to find will go into my story, but it gives me that curiosity. And then, I can feel the different world that I'm researching and become really part of it. And then I can infuse it into my work. And that's why I say any fiction, in fact, even sometimes in poetry, research is really crucial, because while you're researching, you're sort of packing it at the back of your head. You're not going to use everything, but it's going to inform the choices that your characters make in the story. Yeah.
Thanks, Eugen. There is a question. I wonder whether, Chris, are you able to unmute to pose the question to Eugen directly?
Let me have a look. I've taken off.
Yeah, sure, no problem at all.
Thanks.
I put it in the chat because I'm not quite sure whether it works as a question. What has led Afrofuturism to come into being? It feels like it's a movement, and I think it's flourishing. And is it fair to kind of place, applied African sci-fi into a movement such as Afrofuturism? Is it the same thing? Is it part of something, or is it separate from, what's the concepts mean?
So Afrofuturism is actually not a new concept. And the origin of it came from the US, from someone called Mark Derry. And basically, what he was looking at was imagining a future Africa. And this mostly applied to the African Americans in the diaspora because they have this longing to belong. They want to feel part of the motherland. And so in their stories, when they wrote futuristic stories, they became deemed as Afrofuturism. And to this day, there's a lot of niggling. There are people who don't like to be associated with the term Afrofuturism, particularly because Mark Derry was a white man. But my approach to it is when I write, I say that I write Afrofuturistic writing because basically I am imagining a future Africa. But then people prefer to use other kinds of futurisms. And that's why in the nonfiction book that I've written, Afro-centered futurisms in our speculative fiction, I invited different African writers to talk about the specific futurisms in their fictions and what they felt comfortable to use it. And there's an important in naming in the African culture. So if I tell you that my name is Bahati, it means that I was born during maybe, it means lucky. Maybe I was lucky. If I tell you my name is Kurwa, you will know that I am one of twins and I came out first, and that the second one's name is Doto. So the naming is important, and it was important for the African writers to recognize whichever futurism they felt comfortable with. So others use African futurisms, others just write stories about Afro-descendant peoples. There doesn't have to be a consistent terminology because Africa is not a country. And so it's being open to whichever futurism. And that's where you use your speculative fiction either as a caution that this is how bad things can get, which is what I do a lot. I think some of my stories are really stark, like, when the water stops. But some of them can be hopeful stories where we call it black joy, where you imagine a future of an Africa that was never colonized. How would that Africa look like? Yeah.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And also, I just forgot to say thank you at the beginning for a really good talk. And I'm looking forward to reading some of your short stories and some of your novels. Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome. Let me see. We've got is this a question from Paulina? Is that your question? Research priorities are shaped by government and policy objectives. Is science fiction following the same trends? It's almost like a question of the chicken and the egg, because sometimes when you think of some of the movies that we watched, Back to the Future, and then all those things are happening now. So it makes you wonder, were those writers so visionary that they could imagine a future as it is now and even moving into the near future as we imagine it? Or did we learn from those stories and decide to invent and implement those technologies? That's a good question. I don't have an answer to it. Yeah, but I think the more we extrapolate and imagine, and also the example that I gave of the UK government inviting science fiction writers to extrapolate and try to put in place mitigations in advance from their futuristic thinking, that is one way that I think the writing can influence the future trend, because we're using that as a probability to predict. And so what can we do to get ready for it?
Yeah, so a probability, but Paulina, did you want to come in?
Just say yes to reiterate Joe's to shape the future in the definition. Yes, and yeah, thank you. Yeah, well, for the answer and for the brilliant talk.
Thank you. And I'm so sorry I stole a bit of your time because it was meant to be an hour. But so if anybody is not in a rush, just feel free to ask your questions and you can pop them in the chat. Otherwise, you can get in touch with me on social media. I am active on X, unfortunately, but it's where people are, and sometimes it's just good to be present, like being there. I can't shape the conversations if I'm not there. I'm also on Blue Sky. My it's Jenny.bluesky.socials, and otherwise at Eugen Bacon, you'll find me there.
Yeah, Pamela say, it's Matilda says, this is just a feedback. I love the delivery and the passion. I was hooked and would have wanted you to do the full audiobook. Thank you. The final quote on the collaboration and having a sense of wonder and curiosity was beautiful. Amazing. Yeah, that's from Matilda.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so you're talking about time, but actually it was so fascinating. And yeah, people just, I was glued just trying to absorb everything. Africa, your hand is up.
Yeah.
Hi, Eugen, and hi everybody. Eugen, that was marvelous. I'm I work at Imperial. I'm a writer, and I teach the STEM students there, who would absolutely love to hear more about what you have to do. So we might be able to arrange that sometime. There was a couple of things I wanted to highlight. The whole art science discussion is, of course, central to what we do in terms of teaching creative writing, and we have a really mixed, diverse crew of students who produce amazing work. And one of the most remarkable things, I think, is this sort of the ability to be able to see the progression of intellectual development for science students, especially, who are opened up by the activity of engaging in creative practices and produce some really interesting works. And I especially wanted to direct you to the Tamarind Literary Magazine, which was founded by some of our alumni some years ago, who produce an outstanding magazine, which I really think that you would be interested in. So you might be able to give me your email afterwards, and we could maybe at some point arrange another show where you could talk to some of our students, because I think that would be really, really productive for us. Thank you for such a great sweep. It's a tough challenge to address the arts and sciences in these areas, and I think that the way that you've come at it is really interesting here for us.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. I'd be delighted to stay in touch, and Paulina and Onesimus can share with you my details as well, and we can take it from there. And what I've learned, especially students tend to be really curious, and particularly when you're dealing with something very technical, when you break it down into something creative and artistic, you can be very imaginative with it, and you're just exercising both sides of your brain. And that way, you can encourage them with little exercises that slowly unlock that. Yeah. And I was really happy to see there's a call for submissions, calling for proposals, where you're marrying the fiction, Onesimus and Paulina, marrying fiction writers with essayists, so that their works, talk to each other, and they don't even have to talk immediately. Like, basically, the fiction writer writes, and then the essayist comes in and has a look and then interrogates it. Can you distinguish the fact from the fiction? And that's just interesting looking at that. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to add that the seminar series are recorded. African be sharing the YouTube video that perhaps you can also share with the students as well. But yeah, we will share details, Eugene's details, with you, so you can get in touch with her directly. Thank you.
Thank you. And Paulina has just put in the chat. So I am also the fiction editor for the British Science Fiction Association magazine Fiction, and we've just opened Fiction 5 for stories. So if you have a look at I'll have a quick look at the link, and I'll just post it in the chat, and you can encourage anyone just to have a go to write something sciencey, science fictiony, and see where they go with it.
Yeah,
that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Afrique. Mercy, you are writing something. So Eugene, we are also joined by University of Nairobi. So Professor Mburu from Faculty of Agriculture, and Mercy Mburu as well, alongside students from University of Nairobi.
Oh, very good.
Mercy, did you have a question? I saw as if you are writing in the chat. Could you unmute maybe even say hello. Eugene
In fact,
grew up
you
in
know,
Nairobi, so
yeah, Nairobi feels like home. I was just saying to Onesimus before we started. So I went to school at Precious Blood Secondary School in Riruta. And so like all that is my familiar ground. And yeah, I lived in Nairobi for so long until I think I was about 30 when I left to go to the UK. And I worked with the Jesuit Refugee Service. So it's just like all those places, like when I think of Nairobi, it just feels so much like home to me.
yeah, thanks.
Wow.
And Mercy, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Eugene. I really loved your talk and the presentation. It was quite fascinating and I enjoyed every bit of it. What I wanted to ask is that from a science perspective, we are so inclined to facts and we negate the potential of creativity and fiction to deliver our research work. And what I'm wondering is how can we break this barrier?
Yeah, I think initially when you do the research and you get all the facts in a row, and this is where when you write something, you start editing out because fiction is about less is more. And if you find yourself just focusing too much on the technology, sometimes you need to pull back a little bit and then come back into the storytelling because for you to be able to reach the reader, you need to have that human aspect, even if the characters are non-humanoid, but they need to be relatable. So by pulling back and just choosing carefully what you include, that can really help as a starting point. And then one great thing about it is that with fiction, one, you understand the facts and then you apply creative license. So for me to break the truth, I need to know the truth first, because then I can creatively break it in a way that still makes sense. I can extrapolate and invent it further. So it's just moving the next step, like what if? So you start with your facts and then you go, what if? And you keep extrapolating to come up with that story. And then you apply it to that relatable element that will help the reader connect with that story. Yeah, that's one way to do it.
Thanks, Eugene, and thanks, Mercy, for the question.
Thank you so much. So you're welcome to get in touch with me if you'd like to connect with me, or if you wanted to, have my email address or anything, just have a chat with Onesimus and Paulina and they'll connect you. I'm perfectly happy to have more conversations. Yeah.
Thanks. And as you've heard from Africa, maybe we'll invite you again to to give a lecture at Imperial. Now, I would like to, if there is no more question, I don't want to close anybody. If you have a question, Hatibu, you seem to be unmuting. Do you have a question? Maybe not. Yeah, so we would like to bring the session to a close, and thank you for persevering with us. And would like to thank you to thank Eugen very much for such a lovely session. And I wish you all the best. Thank you very much. And goodbye for now.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you
You're
to
welcome.
everybody who came today. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.